All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming this afternoon. I'm Patty Stish. I'm a professor of biology, and I'm director of the University Honors Program. And it's my pleasure today to welcome you to the 2019 Eastern Fellows Panel Program. The Eastern Fellows Program was established in 2008-2009, and the purpose is to recognize and engage our distinguished alumni. We want to bring them to the university and involve them in campus life. We want to enrich the educational experience for our current students who may learn something important from the life stories of our alumni. You'll find diverse pathways. Not often do you travel the path you intend, but you end up where you're meant to be. And this is an exciting and stimulating way for students and faculty to benefit from the knowledge of people in their professions. I'm going to introduce our guests today, our distinguished alumni. Mr. Cody Guarnieri was in the class of 2009. At Eastern, he earned a Bachelor of Arts with double majors in history and social political science, and he was a University Honors Scholar. He went on to earn a JD at the University of Connecticut Law School in 2012, and now he's a partner at Brown, Paindris, and Scott, and he's involved in criminal defense and personal injury litigation. Dr. Justin Pirro was in the class of 2005. At Eastern, he earned a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry, and then he went on to earn a PhD at Dartmouth Medical School, where he studied prion-related diseases of the brain. As a principal research scientist at AbbVie's Foundation Neuroscience Center, he continues to study brain pathologies such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And finally, Dr. Lawrence Larry Smith, class of 1977. He earned a Bachelor of Arts in Biology. He earned his Master's of Science in Physiology at the University of Kansas, and then went on to a PhD at the University of Maryland. He spent 14 years as a professor of biology at Idaho State University before he moved into the upper-level administration at Utah State University, where he now serves as the vice president of statewide campuses. Welcome. This is going to be a pop quiz format. Actually, not really. They were provided with these prompts. We have 4 prompts for our panel today, and I'm going to go through them one by one and give each the chance to address the prompts. Probably going to have to limit them to 2 or 3 minutes each, so I'm not always subtle about cutting off if you're running on. But in any case, I'm going to start with Dr. Smith, and then we can move down the table. Discuss your career path post-graduation from Eastern with a specific mention of any mentors or internship hands-on experiences that you had here that played a significant role in your career and your success.
Sure, thank you, Patty. And it will be impossible for a university administrator to keep their remarks to 2 to 3 minutes. So you better get that hand warmed up like this. As I shared a little bit of this with the class I visited this morning, and I'm happy to elaborate this afternoon. I attended Eastern with one goal in mind, and that was to go on to optometry college. My mother was a secretary in an optometry office while I was going through high school, and I thought that was a pretty good gig, good paycheck, and I was in a health-related field. But I think I enjoyed the social aspects of student culture at Eastern a little too much in my early time, so I was not competitive during the early part of my college career here to get right into optometry college. So I was advised by an amazing faculty member who served as a mentor to me here. Her name was Flavia O'Rourke, who was only at USU, only at Eastern for a very short time. But she was very inspiring. She brought federal research funding to Eastern, and that paid for the engagement of undergraduates in actual scientific research. She also provided other kinds of opportunities for students to get involved in research kinds of activities. Anyway, she mentored me during the graduate application process, and so I, more easily than I had predicted, was able to get into a master's program in physiology at the University of Kansas. I then, as Patty mentioned, went on to the University of Maryland for my PhD, and then I did several postdocs at medical schools and research institutes, two of which were here in New England. So I mentioned the influence and impact of Flavia O'Rourke on my career. I also remember very fondly the Bermuda Biological Station visit that I was involved in. I think it was a 2-credit course in Ocean Island ecology. And they took about 20 of us to the Bermuda Biological Station for about 10 days. And that was led by Barry Wolf and Mike Gable. And Mike Gable was someone who was very, very important to me in terms of his influence on my biology career. He worked on invertebrates while I was in that Bermuda course. Are you almost there? While I was
I am almost there.
Okay. Well, very quick, I'll finish this piece. When I was at the Bermuda Biological Station, I wrote a paper on the biology of a little mollusk, a little sea slug, very obscure. But I became fascinated by invertebrates and mollusks in particular, and so, to conclude, both my master's research and my PhD research were on different kinds of mollusks. So my graduate career really was born out of an Eastern experience, a high-impact kind of experience.
Thank you. Dr. Pira?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me here today. So let me see. So I started at Eastern. I knew that I wanted to be in the sciences. Originally was part of the biology department. And then when the new biochemistry degree became approved and accredited, switched over a little bit into that. And spent my early time here at Eastern. I had a work study program working for the biology department. Have several sort of funny stories about sticking my hands into these big vats and Mike Gable's vats of these preserved animals and trying to get that collection organized over the summer. One of my favorite jobs was having to feed the frogs that were used for the behavioral course, trying to grab them out of midair with my hand and feed them liver with the other piece. So lots of sort of interesting experiences there. Along the way, so through the sort of coursework and the interaction of being in the lab, I applied and was accepted into a Howard Hughes Medical Institute program that's run out of Wesleyan University that specializes in giving undergraduates sort of a summer experience of working in the lab. And it was really that experience of day-to-day in and out doing what it is that a scientist does that really solidified to me the career path and where I needed to go. And I was actually able to take some of that research back to Eastern and continue working on that, and it became the topic of the honors thesis that I wrote when I was here. In terms of faculty members that were very influential to me, both are actually in the room, Dr. Coles and Dr. Tate, academic advisement. I consider them good friends and were always there to support me. So very appreciative of that. I think during my time as the summer student and working within the biology department, I also had this sort of unique experience where I really got to know all of the faculty, especially within the biology department, on a one-to-one interaction. And so we would actually, they would have their lunches with the student workers. There was 2 or 3 of us working, and we'd all gather around in one of the classrooms and have our lunch every day. And so really got to interact with them on a personal level, which I think is one of the benefits of being at a small state school like Eastern. Where you're not going to get that kind of opportunity at some of the larger schools, and it's really those personal relationships that become the most meaningful moving forward. So from there, was able to sort of, once I decided that the research track was sort of what I wanted to do, applied to graduate schools, and as was mentioned, wound up at Dartmouth up in New Hampshire. There where I again, we talked a little bit about different paths and things. So the things that I thought that I was interested in, it turned out maybe weren't the right fit necessarily, and through different lab rotations got exposed to different elements and ultimately settled on a biochemistry lab that was working in on prion diseases, which are a neurological disorder. And since then, I've been in neuroscience. I've worked at both Pfizer and now at AbbVie, studying different diseases of the brain and developing therapeutics to try to combat them. But what's really interesting is I'm not a neuroscientist. I've never taken a neuroscience course. This is all sort of on the job training and applied learning from the research that I had done previously to bring me on it. So I'm on this track now, but this isn't necessarily where I thought I was going to be.
Great. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Cody Guarnieri. I'm not a scientist. I barely made it through chemistry. And so I am your dissenting voice. I am a lawyer. And I came to Eastern positive about what I wanted to study and what I wanted to do. My mother was a bartender. My father worked in a factory, the same factory his father worked in. And I grew up in Milford, Connecticut. And I was sure that I wanted to be a high school teacher. And so I came to Eastern and did my gen ed courses and did my pre-education courses and got to my shadowing, and I went to shadow high school history for one day. And I decided that I love history and I hate high schoolers. And that was the end of my teaching career. But I've always been interested in the criminal justice process and true crime issues, and I realized that my love of history and my love of political science and political history, and I studied in Ireland while I was at Eastern, and was interested in their political system and their political history, and I think that I was really drawn to the stories and the storytelling aspects of history and the narratives that you see, and kind of these lofty political and social economic issues that you study in these fields. And that led me to think about the possibility of going to law school. And needless to say, I did not know any lawyers. And I had never been to a law office, thankfully. I say thankfully, I go to one a lot now. And I through Eastern, I interned in the public defender's office in New Britain, Connecticut. And, coming from my background, I showed up to court with a button-up shirt and no tie and khakis, because I don't know what people wear to court. Never been to court. And from there, I was really interested in the process still. I took the law school admissions test when I was a junior. I got a suit and wore it to court, as one might expect. And through the activities I did at Eastern and my law school admission test score, was able to get into University of Connecticut School of Law. I graduated, I interned with a federal judge while I was in law school in the District of Connecticut, and was involved in, traveled around the country doing mock trials and moot court competitions for the University of Connecticut. I graduated in 2012. I took the bar exam. I won't get too deeply into that because I don't like to think about it if I don't have to. And joined the bar of the state of Connecticut. Throughout law school, I clerked, which is like apprenticed with a law firm in Hartford, which after law school took me on as an associate attorney. And after 6 years after I came out of law school, I was elected to partnership with my firm, which is a mid-sized firm that's based in Hartford and Glastonbury, Connecticut. and I am a trial lawyer. I specialize in criminal defense, personal injury, and complex litigation matters. So I do jury trials as opposed to other lawyers that negotiate contracts or do appeals. I do conduct the selection of jury members, presentation of evidence in front of the jury to conclusion, and I've handled matters in virtually every court in the state of Connecticut, the Federal District of Connecticut, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in New York City, and they've involved various kinds of cases from, complex medical malpractice cases to criminal defense of bank robberies, murders, other kinds of violent crimes. And in terms of inspiration, I had fantastic professors while I was here, but I would say one of my fundamental experiences while I was at Eastern in terms of faculty was actually, I don't know if, I know he's still here, but Father Lawrence LaPointe, if people know Father Larry. Yeah. So I was president of Interfaith Campus Ministries when I was at Eastern, and I cooked pasta with Father Larry every Thursday. And we talked about what was going on in classes and what we were learning. And I came to Mass every Sunday night in this room and heard explanations, contextual information, all the kind of deeper dives than I was used to into, the theology of the Catholic faith. But then, in terms of our Thursdays, contemplating the stuff that, we were discussing in history courses or political science courses or current events. And I think that was really meaningful to me in terms of developing this analytical thinking framework from the information that we were being taught in the classroom setting.
I think you're getting a thread here, right? Hands-on, one-on-one, in all different disciplines. That's what's leading to their success and their adaptability. Okay, so Eastern is Connecticut's liberal arts university. So I'm wondering if you can address how learning to think critically, to write skillfully, those types of soft skills that we highlight here at Eastern may have influenced your success. And we'll start with Dr. Piero.
Okay, sure. I think, quote unquote, soft skills, I think these are actually the most important skills. So we can develop a detailed knowledge about whatever specific field we happen to be involved in. But if you can't think critically about that field and those problems, you're never going to be able to advance or move forward within that position. And if you can't write skillfully, and I would add what's especially important for a position that I have is being able to communicate effectively and giving oral presentations and things like this. If you can't communicate and interact with the audience and get your point across, then that knowledge is basically wasted. You have to be able to share that. So I would say that those are, while they're soft skills, they're actually, in my opinion, some of the most important skills that you can have. And I think one of the benefits of education at Eastern, I have to say, is really the value. And I think there's a lot of discussion ongoing around raising tuition costs, and we'll probably hear more about it in the upcoming political season as people begin discussing this. Having been at both at Eastern at a public liberal arts university and then also experience at a private university, I can tell you that the classes that you're sitting in now are the exact same classes that the students at these private universities are also sitting in. You're often reading the exact same textbooks, going through the same lab courses. They're just paying a premium for it. What I think is really the value is what you get out of Eastern. And then again, back on that thread of the one-on-one interaction, in the upper level biochemistry courses, there were, I don't know, 3, maybe 4 of us in the course. It doesn't get much more one-on-ones, direct access to the professor. At some of the larger universities, I know because I was teaching them, they're getting taught at the lower level courses by graduate students. They're not even interacting with the professors. I'm not sure that that's going on here now at all, but you're getting direct education from the experts in the field, and that's a real value.
Thank you. Mr. Guarnieri?
Oh, Cody. Just Cody, yeah. So I presume that a number of you that are here today read the description, maybe thought about why you would come to this panel. Maybe, there's somebody on this panel that has an interesting career path that is something that you could conceive yourself following. I would tell you that there are absolutely no barriers whatsoever to anyone who's coming out of Eastern to be a lawyer if that's what you want to be. You can be a lawyer if you graduate from Eastern and apply yourself so as to achieve these skills that you're here to acquire, right? So I would almost say, they say that in law school you're taught to think like a lawyer. And I think that that's true. There's a Socratic method in law school where you are asked to, read an obscene amount of, cases and documents, and then just put on the spot and ask questions. And you do learn to think in certain ways. You learn to analyze problems in certain ways. But, on the one hand, the foundational aspects of that, your reading comprehension, your analytical thinking, your problem solving, those are the skills that you are supposed to come to law school with. Those are the skills that you have acquired through the disciplines that you're studying at Eastern. And there's, to the extent that you put in the effort to acquire those skills here, there is no reason that you will not have them to fall back on. I did not feel, coming from Eastern, and my class at UConn Law, was predominantly people who were graduating from NYU and UCLA and Yale, and there was, one or more students from Harvard. I was at no disadvantage whatsoever in terms of ability to comprehend the materials and to distill them and to accomplish the tasks that were set before me. On the other hand, I would say that that baseline that you develop at Eastern is almost something that we, as at least myself as a trial lawyer, tried to get back to, because after 3 years of law school, the way that you talk and interact, you almost have to unlearn it. It's like talking like a lawyer is a horrible, horrible thing. And so trying to regain that baseline of communication and, distilling information and sharing it in meaningful ways to a jury and not sounding like a lawyer and, making things more complicated than they need to be, shorthand for sounding like a lawyer. I think that's something that you really do acquire at a liberal arts university like Eastern, and something that we try to regain in the years following law school and in the practice of law itself.
Great, thank you.
So having a career in higher education, I've witnessed firsthand and been directly involved in the conflict between what students think they need to learn and what the faculty think you need to learn. It was true 42 years ago, and it'll go on for another 420 years. I was a biology major, obviously, and I learned a lot of dots. But I didn't always know how to connect those dots. And so the liberal arts aspect of my education became critical in allowing me to be able to do that. For example, talk about specific faculty here at Eastern. I took, because I had to, or I felt I had to, I took introductory philosophy from Frank Connolly. And I loved it. It was great because it was the study of logic, all right? I liked philosophy so much, I took a second course from Frank Connolly on Western philosophers, and we studied Spinoza, Leibniz, Descartes. And there I learned about the value of reasoning and thinking and connecting dots and what logic was, right? At the same time, I also felt, oh, here I go, I'm required to take a literature course. So I took a course about modern authors. Now, okay, this is in the 70s, so modern needs to be contextualized. But I read the works of Philip Roth, who was young at the time. He passed away a couple years ago. And I took another course where I read it was a theater arts course, and I read the works of Samuel Beckett, Waiting for Godot, and those sorts of people. And what I got out of that liberal arts experience was an appreciation for telling a story. So the liberal arts part of my Eastern education allowed me to process and put together arguments using logic and storytelling, and that became very powerful to me in my science career, because I found out that when I had to make a living writing research grants to get money to do science and write publications, write papers about my scientific research, I had to put together a logical argument, and I had to tell a story. Scientists, and they won't admit this, or at least most won't admit, scientists have to be great storytellers, all right? And as I started teaching science, teaching physiology and cell biology and so on, I would try to tell stories, and I would even try to dive into the lives of the scientist and share that story with you, with the students, all right? Because that made the science alive, and it connected the dots of science in a very special way that had meaning, right? Because we each have a story to tell, all right? And that made science alive to me.
Thank you. I think it's important to recognize that the skills they're talking about has allowed them to advance in their careers so that they are in control of their careers. That there are careers in which you could find yourself showing up and doing what you're told to do each day. But these are the skills that have allowed them to succeed and be the leaders in their field. So that's what we wish for all of you in your classes as well. Okay, so now we're going to move on and ask about your current occupation, your current position. Where do you see challenges and opportunities that our soon-to-be graduates might face? And maybe we could lump this in with the final idea of what is your best piece of advice for dealing with the opportunities and challenges in your field? Cody, we'll start with you.
Sure. So if you were to enter into my field, you will have graduated Eastern, and you will have been accepted to and graduated at a law school, ABA accredited law school, University of Connecticut, somewhere else, and would be, looking for a job in legal services. Right now, there are lots of jobs available that are kind of what I would call the jobs where you're not necessarily in control of your own destiny. Insurance defense, major insurance providers that take on dozens or hundreds of trial lawyers to defend car accident cases. The kinds of jobs that you have the ability to build your own practice, kind of, something of, I don't want to say a bygone era, but they're harder to find. Almost in some sense, like medical services, there is a conglomeration of legal services, for these kinds of insurance defense firms. So I think that that's a challenge that, is confronting graduates of law schools now, whether or not they can find work that's meaningful to them, that they can take a personal stake in their future. And so, I think that that's an important consideration for somebody who's graduating. When I'm doing hiring or making hiring decisions for my law firm, and we're thinking about bringing on a lawyer, and this kind of goes to what I was saying earlier, I will presume that you can, that you have these skills that we've been talking about. I will presume, you pass the bar exam, you're capable of practicing law. You may not know the procedure, you may not know what the substantive law is at the time, but Another, what I would say, advantage of coming from Eastern, from a liberal arts university, is more important to me when I'm hiring a lawyer is that I get the impression that you are motivated, right? That you are going to take initiative, that you can do the work. But I'm looking for lawyers that I get the sense they're going to do what they can on slow days to, develop their own business, or when they are confronted by, potential roadblocks procedurally or substantively, that they're going to come to me as a resource, but not first. They're going to have looked at the statutes. They're going to have done the case law research. They're going to have done the troubleshooting necessary. And, the one thing that is, a huge problem for me when we have law clerks, attorneys in training, is when they come to ask questions that they have not looked into at all. I even hate it when other lawyers call me and ask me, what do you think about this situation? And I'll say, well, did you read the statute? So I think that one of the things that it tells me about a resume of somebody from Eastern is that they did put in the work, that they came from Eastern and that they went to law school, and that's, already I'm thinking that that's potentially somebody that's going to put in that extra initiative, that's going to work hard to get ahead. And that is more valuable to me than any amount of doing the work. I could just say that, right off the bat. And, I think that that's something that you want to develop in how you present yourself in the legal field. And I often tell that to clients that, there are attorneys that you can hire that graduated from Harvard Law School. I don't think they're practicing in the Hartford area. Maybe they are. But, the reality of the way I practice law and the way that I expect the people who practice with me is that we will outwork the other side, because there's really no shortcut to it. So I think that that's, a very important thing to take into account if this is the kind of career choice that you're thinking about making for yourself.
So I think you've circled back to one of these very important soft skills of independently driven learning,
Right.
Taking that initiative, being motivated, also things you're probably hearing from your professors, right? Did you read the syllabus? It's in the syllabus. Wonderful, thank you. Dr. Pirro?
Okay, sure. I think I sort of...
Challenges and opportunities, advice.
Advice. So I prepared, there's a couple challenges. The first really, when people hear the word biochemistry, I think it's a scary word. They say, hey, this is a really hard major. Why am I going to put myself through this? And that's really, I think, applicable to all of the sciences, really. And so, one of the things I talked about when I met with the students earlier today is all of the sort of different job opportunities that are actually available that even I'm still learning about in my professional life. And there's really, so many things that you don't even know exist, and people have these really cool and fun jobs that if you're not exposed to it, you really have no knowledge. So I think, part of the challenge is really first, deciding that this is a path that you want to take. And as a little anecdote, I was reflecting back on this before coming here today, and I remember the conversation I had with my parents when I said, hey, I'm going to declare biochemistry, and my dad said, well, what are you going to do with that? That was the first question out of it. And I think, if you say you're going to major in education, or, there's a very sort of clear path forward. And, one of the best things I did was sort of try to ignore a little bit of that advice and trust my gut and say, hey, this is what I want to do, and I'll figure it out as I go. And it's worked out pretty well. The second, I think, challenge for people in my area, and so I'm obviously working within the pharmaceutical industry, and there's a lot of great opportunities just a few hours away up in Boston and Cambridge area, which is really now the center of research and development for biotech and pharma across the nation. So there's literally 1,000 companies in the greater Boston area that would hire people with science backgrounds. The challenge is really getting your foot in the door. And I think the answer to that is really in building your network, in identifying individuals who are doing things that you think are cool and fun that you might want to do, and then directly reaching out to them. and building that network. And one of the other things I touched upon this morning was really the use of LinkedIn. So it's really easy these days to go on LinkedIn, you log in, click, connect. It's not really about the quantity of your network, it's really about the quality of those interactions. And it's really, I would urge all of you to really try to reach out and directly interact with the people on a one-to-one basis, so they have an understanding of who you are and where you're coming from, and then they're more likely to be able to help you out in the future.
So it occurs to me while you're speaking that Big Pharma and biotech has a whole army of attorneys. So there's a lot of crossover opportunities, right? Attorneys will need training in that discipline, but if you're going to be a patent attorney for biotech, you probably need some background in science. So in my view, another reason to be at a place like Eastern, where you have opportunities to cross over even large disciplines.
And there's very specialized career paths that you can take when you harness the ability of two different disciplines and you bring them together. So biology and computer programming. There's a whole team of bioinformatics individuals who work at these kinds of companies and mine genetic data to pull out information. Individuals who can go into insurance claims and pull out the codes and say, okay, as an individual who's been taking Lipitor have a higher or lower incidence of a specific disease? Is there some new biology there that we can learn something about the disease and then leverage that? So these sort of different disciplines and being able to pair them, so chemistry and law, as a patent attorney as another example, business and biology, and going into consulting and really helping these companies guide the strategic marketing direction of where they need to go, or what areas they should be investing in now, so that they're at the cutting edge in 10 years when they need to be.
Thank you. Dr. Smith?
So the second half of my career, I've been a university administrator. So if there's anyone sitting out there that is thinking they want to be a university administrator, you need help. The first half of my career, I was a biology professor, which, Patty, as you know, is the highest possible calling, second perhaps only to being a lawyer. Spending a career at a university, I've seen a lot of graduation speeches, a lot of commencement addresses. And invariably, the commencement speaker tells all the students, pursue your passion. Well, I got a little problem with that. I have several problems with that. One is that right now you may not know your passion. And that's okay, all right? Secondly, your passions can change. So I was in my late 40s when my passion for being a biologist changed, and I found great satisfaction, career satisfaction, personal satisfaction, being a university administrator and trying to build systems and operations and environments where my colleagues, my fellow faculty colleagues and students could be more successful. I got a kick out of that. Helping others be more successful. So your passions can change. Just be aware of that, all right? Thirdly, the tricky part about pursuing your passion, whatever that is that you have to have that passion turn into a paycheck. All right? That's the really hard part. All right? Now, that may not happen the day after you graduate from Eastern, and that's okay. It may take you some time. You may need several kinds of jobs, all kinds of experiences, a lot of thinking. All right? Reflecting on your personal story about what you've learned and what you want to do with it and what kind of impact you want to make on society. All right? I think you will find your passion. but it doesn't have to be today, and it doesn't have to be the day after you graduate. It's okay to take your time and think really hard about it. It's all right.
Thank you. So we have guests here at different stages of their career, but all of them are relating or sharing with us today how that's developed. I'm wondering if you have views to the next step. Careers are long, passions change. What do you see yourself doing in 5 to 10 years? We'll start at the other end of the table and work our way back again.
I consider myself early in my career. I anticipate being in private practice. My partners, the one challenge that I face is that I was elected to partnership at a firm early in my career. And, there's a number of reasons that was the case. But the challenge that I face is that 5 of my partners are in their 70s. Another group of my partners are in their 60s. And the jump between me and the next partner in my law firm that is, next in age to me is, I'm going to be 33 next week, and he's in his mid-50s. So I've got something of a gap that I need to fill in terms of servicing clients when my partners who are in their 70s retire, if they do that in my field. I don't know many that do, but slow down enough that they're no longer actively practicing at the same level that they are. So I think that, I've taken on substantial amount of management responsibilities for my law firm with regards to marketing and the IT component, and I'm ethics counsel for my law firm because the legal profession has its own very, significant system of policing ethics. So I would say, over the next 5 to 10 years, I can look forward to increasing management responsibilities for the law firm, which are as important, if not a more important function than the actual practice of law.
So, this is something that I have tried to think about a little bit of the next step, and so far in the career I've been at a few different sort of what would be considered larger pharma companies, and there's a clear path there that one could follow. I think where my interests lie is going to be getting more into the startup and venture capital type area. So in Cambridge, where I am, there's new companies formed every day, and there's a lot of freedom in that. So we talked a little bit about writing grants for money. I don't have to do that. Instead I have to go into the boardroom every 6 months and justify my science and my project to continue to get my paycheck and to continue to keep my research going. Going into a startup company gives you a whole nother level of sort of freedom and to take that science where it's driving you. And I guess in that case you'd be going to get seed money from venture capital, et cetera. So, but what's exciting about it is again, trying to marry different disciplines and really getting my feet wet in more of the business development side and bringing some of that business. And, when you're part of a 4-person company, everything about that company falls on your shoulders. And so you're out there interacting, you're giving the presentations, you're driving the science, you have sort of more of a strategic decision making in terms of where that company's headed and the value and the impact you can bring without being constrained by a board of directors who says, turns out Alzheimer's is really hard to cure, and we're going to walk away from it. And that's exactly what happened to me a few years ago when Pfizer shut down the entire neuroscience group. So being able to get into a position where I can control my own destiny is something that would be exciting.
So let's face it, 5 years from now, I'm going to be fishing, skiing, and making wine. But between now and then, what I'd like to do is get more engaged in leadership training. I've got a little bit of experience in leadership now, and I enjoy sharing that, sharing my perspectives on leadership. I was recently selected by the Commissioner of Higher Education in Utah to be a mentor in a women's leadership mentorship exchange program. And so I'm working with a very delightful and promising, they call them proteges, at a neighboring university, a young woman who is director of a graduate program at a university. And so that's a year-long program trying to share with her my experiences on leadership. So that's what I hope I'll be able to do at Utah State over the next several years in my spare time, besides filling in for vice presidents who go away.
Excellent. I think all of them have shared with us too how they're involved in passing the mentoring and leadership and skills that they've gained to us here today, but to the cohorts below them. I think education is a community that we want to build here and then maintain as we go. And so I want to make sure that we have a chance for the students to ask some questions. Maybe the faculty have additional questions, insights that I haven't probed yet. But first, let's thank our guests for their remarks today. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask? Some of you are nearing graduation. Yes, would you stand up? Thank you.
So I can start. I think, you know, as you're in your sophomore year, you're starting to get an idea of what it is you want to do. I think getting the practical hands-on experience in the field is the most important thing. So I would advocate strongly to, again, start building that network, reach out, internships, spending some time with people who are doing the things that you think you want to do, even if it's a non-paid non-paid, just one day, picking their brain about what it is that you need to do to prepare for the specific area that you want to go into. And I think, you know, having now been on the side where I'm reviewing resumes and trying to hire people for positions, it's always the individuals who have that hands-on real-world experience in the given field that rise to the top and stand out from the rest of the group. So I think starting in your sophomore and junior year, that's really the time to cultivate those types of interactions.
Yeah, I would step back even further and say I had a buddy at Eastern, and he was in the honors program with me, and virtually the entire time our first year and most of the second year, whenever somebody asked him his major, he said something different. Like literally made up majors that do not exist and just kept it, it was almost like this running joke, like, what are you majoring in? He's one of the curators of the 9/11 Memorial in Manhattan now. But I would say by the end of sophomore year, to get the credits you need, it's decision-making time is the most important part. And then, once the decision's made, that hands-on experience, it could be the difference between getting the interview and not. So, my sophomore year is when I had made certain decisions because I needed to get prepared to take the law school admission test junior year. So.
I don't remember 1974 for a variety of reasons. By the time you're a sophomore, it's time to start doing a lot of reflection on your path. Maybe your instincts are to make a little course correction or not, or a greater devotion to the path you want to take, all right? Because now you're going to be taking more and more major courses, right? And so just make sure that you frequently do a self-check on how you feel about where you're going and what it is you're doing.
I would add that I see students worried about making the decision, and you don't want indecision to be the roadblock. So make the decision, go for it, and change course if you need to later. Being afraid to commit to something doesn't do you any good. So, okay, final thing. Each of them have shared with us how they're involved in hiring practices. Could you give us one example question that you might give in an in-person interview?
So cliche as it may be, I will ask a person who I'm interviewing what their weakness is, what their biggest weakness is, right? And I'm still shocked that people do not anticipate and prepare for that question. You have to prepare for that question, and you have to present something that you can, it's almost like, what's your biggest weakness? And you want to say something that's like, that sounds like a weakness, but really isn't a weakness, right? From a business, perspective. So I remember one of the answers that I would give when I was asked that question interviewing was that I become obsessively focused at times to try to address, that nagging issue at hand. Sounds bad, right? Obsessively focused doesn't sound like a good thing. But, the read on it is, I'm going to be intensely focused on solving your problems if I was a member of your team. Can't use that one. That one's mine. But, that is the kind of question I think you should all be, equipped to handle.
So for in my team, I have individuals with PhDs, masters, and bachelor level, and so the types of interview questions that we ask vary a little bit about depending on the level of the individual. But the real crux of some of the questions, and obviously being from a scientific industry, it's really around give me a time when you were in the lab or you were doing a lab with a coursework and an experiment didn't work. Why didn't it work? How did you troubleshoot the problem? What did you do to solve that issue? And it's really getting at, again, that ability to think critically about the problem and to be creative about how you're going to go about solving that problem. Because that person, whether they have a background in X, Y, or Z, is going to be able to adapt and apply their problem-solving skills to different types of questions and issues. And so, when I'm trying to interview someone, it's really getting at understanding how they think and how are they able to problem solve.
Yeah, Justin took my question on proving you can problem solve. So I'll give you another one. Tell me about a time when you had to communicate in a very clear and compelling way some issue. So you better, so this is no longer the question. So my advice to you is get the experience of communicating hard things, all right, so that you can move others to a better place, right?
Excellent. All right, I think we're going to close there. I know that our guests have a few minutes if you were a little shy about asking a question in public. I know that they'd be happy to speak with you one-on-one. But thank you again for your time and your commitment to Eastern. We appreciate it.